I don't think you can justify what is happening in Gaza either anymore. I don't think you can do it with the arguments that the Israeli government offered in the opening days, which worked, the determination to pursue Hamas, to punish Hamas, to eradicate Hamas, but I think the impossibility of concluding that there is a rather different agenda in play, and that agenda involves quite possibly the complete destruction of that part of the world, to the point where nobody who was living there on October the 6th will be able to live there in the future. I'd love you. I look forward to you persuading me that I'm wrong, but I'm afraid that the continuing carnage suggests that it will not end until there's barely anybody left alive. Whether or not it involves opening up the gate into Egypt so that people can flee, quite possibly never to return, or whether they return under Israeli rule, time will tell. But the attempts that I have undertaken to see it as a kind of balanced or what's the word I'm looking for? A poised situation, this conflict. I'm not even sure I can call it a war. Israeli soldiers killed yesterday by Hamas terrorists. That bit looks like a war, when armed personnel fire upon armed personnel, but when nearly 20,000 civilians have been killed, the conclusion that this is about killing civilians becomes increasingly hard to avoid. It really does for me. I'm going to play you a clip of the Israeli ambassador to this country, which I think if you... And I listen, actually, no, I'll do it again. I've done it several times. And I think it's important to do it again. I completely understand the motivation of many supporters of Israel who will be now indulging in enormous cognitive dissonance. You know that the events in Gaza can't be justified. You know that when you say it's very important to eradicate Hamas or release the hostages, with each passing day, with every child that's killed, that loses salience. It becomes ever clearer that is probably not the motivation of the government. There are two members of the Israeli administration who I'm going to draw your attention to today. One is the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom, and one is the Israeli finance minister, who gave a speech in Paris recently, which I am afraid has taken away a lot of my determination to describe what is going on in Gaza through a lens of reasonable response. In fact, given the quite correct condemnation of people using the phrase "from the river to the sea" on marches through London, a map of Greater Israel, alongside which the finance minister in Benjamin Netanyahu's government chose to give a speech in Paris last month, doesn't just extend the current borders. It essentially wipes out the country of Jordan. It essentially wipes out the kingdom of Jordan. We'll get onto that shortly. First, I want you to hear from the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Tzipi Hotovely, who pops up quite a lot on British media. And most of us who have sought to cling to the conviction that a death in Israel on October the 7th is as heartbreaking and as harrowing as a death in Gaza just in the last 8 minutes, and I will never move from that position. However passionately you argue or however much history you cite, I will never feel more heartbroken by the death of a Palestinian child than I do about the killing, the indiscriminate killing now of an Israeli child. It just won't happen, I'm afraid. I won't go there. And when you are trying to steer a course, when you're trying to walk that tightrope, the one thing you reach for is the two-state solution. The only reasonable conclusion to this nightmare comes when there are two states, comes when Palestinian people can live freely and peacefully alongside Israeli people. Now, there are people on both sides of the conflict at the moment who don't want that to happen. On one side, they are terrorists. On the other side, unless I've misunderstood this interview that was given to Sky News yesterday, on the other side, you have the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom. So anybody who thought, and this is going to be a crucial part of the conversation that we have today, anybody who argues that the two-state solution is the ultimate end game, regardless of how much carnage there is in Gaza in the coming weeks, I'm afraid you really need to listen to this.
You need to do
solution?
What
is there still a chance for a two-state solution?
I think it's about time for the world to realize the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one. And in order to build a new one...
Does that new one include the Palestinians living in a state of their own? Is that what it includes?
I think the biggest question is what type of Palestinians are on the other side. This is what Israel realized
do they
on
have
7th
a state,
of October.
though?
The answer is absolutely no, and I'll tell you why.
Well, then
because
how can there be peace? How can there be peace in
the reason there is no peace
Israel
is because the Palestinians...
Without offering a state to Palestine, how can there be peace in Israel?
Israel knows today, and the world should know now, the reason the Oslo Accords failed is because the Palestinians never wanted to have a state next to Israel. They want to have a state from the river to the sea.
So the two-state solution is dead?
Why are you obsessed with a formula that never worked, that created this radical people in the other side? Why are you obsessed with that?
Why are you obsessed with that? Because we've been told from the very first time I began to talk about these issues, we've been told that the two-state solution was the only viable peace that could be achieved. The alternative is the complete eradication of one side, that the destruction of the modern state of Israel or the eradication of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And then subsequently, you would have to conclude with a very grim sense of foreboding, subsequently similar occurrences unfolding on the West Bank. The West Bank, of course, is adjacent to the Kingdom of Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And it is to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan that I turn your attention next. It was in March 2023, forgive me, not last month, that the Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, elected to give a speech in which he claimed that the Palestinian people are an invention. An invention. This is the finance minister. I don't know if that's the direct equivalent of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, but it's someone in the very heart of the highest echelons of the Israeli administration. He has described the Palestinian people as an invention. Now, I don't have the verbatim translation, so maybe there's some room to not be as shocked by that as I currently am, but that to me is at the very least dehumanizing, or at the very least delegitimizing, and at the very most, at the very worst, it is dehumanizing. I'm getting all of this, by the way, from the Times of Israel newspaper. I think it's important to disclose sources. And the speech was given, the speech in which he described Palestinian people as an invention, was given alongside a map on the podium. He stood on the podium adjacent to a map of what is called Greater Israel. And Greater Israel includes modern-day Jordan. So I hate whataboutery, and I'm very keen to avoid it. I don't think it's whataboutery to say if the river to the sea chant is so obnoxious and so offensive when it's done by civilian marchers on the streets of London, how the hell can a senior member of the Israeli government get away with giving a speech alongside a map that eradicates the modern Kingdom of Jordan without coming in for rather more criticism than an anonymous civilian protester, a peace marcher on the streets of London? These are all questions that I want you to answer. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you will need to do so. So the Israeli ambassador says there is no such thing as Palestinian people. The Israeli finance minister says, I beg your pardon, the Israeli ambassador to the UK says that there is no prospect of a two-state solution, that there will never be a two-state solution. Why are you so obsessed with a two-state solution? It's time for the world to realize that there won't be a two-state solution. So that's out there now. That's the Israeli ambassador speaking on Sky News last night. The Israeli finance minister calls Palestinian people an invention and stands happily alongside a map that eradicates the modern-day Kingdom of Jordan. It literally denies its existence. A story that at the time got no coverage at all that I've been able to find in the United Kingdom, but which did prompt the Jordanian government to summon the Israeli envoy there in protest at the speech, during which he claimed Palestinian people are an invention while standing behind a map of Greater Israel. So those two things are really important. The coverage comes from the Times of Israel, and the personnel that we are talking about are senior Israeli diplomats and politicians. The Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom and the Israeli finance minister, part of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition and head of a party called Religious Zionism. Again, I'm working on the English language version of the Times of Israel for these translations. And then you turn to Joe Biden, essentially suggesting at the weekend at a meeting with donors that they don't want any solution with the Palestinians. They just want to punish all the Palestinians. This is Biden describing Netanyahu as a good friend, but saying he had to change. This is the President of the United States of America talking. This is the most conservative government in Israel's history. He referring to Itamar Ben-Gvir and others. They are a different, who we haven't mentioned yet. We've only mentioned the ambassador and the finance minister. They are a different kind of bunch. Word for word, pay attention. This is not translated. They don't want any solution with the Palestinians. They just want to punish all the Palestinians. And now I turn your attention to events at the United Nations General Assembly 2 nights ago, where 153 member states out of a total of 193 voted in favour of an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. So that, of course, would involve Hamas ceasing to fire rockets towards Israel, and it would involve Israel ceasing the apparently indiscriminate killing of Palestinian civilians, described by the President of the United States of America as motivated by a desire just to punish all the Palestinians. Joe Biden arriving, it would seem, at the conclusion that many people supportive of Israel's current government are of the view that there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian. So you've got the ambassador to the UK, you've got the finance minister, you've got the President of the United States of America in the picture at the moment, and finally you have 153 out of 193 countries in the United Nations General Assembly voting in favour of an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. 10 voted against, including the United States and Israel. 23 abstained, including the United Kingdom. So the idea that the world is divided on this issue is hokum. It's nonsense. The world is not divided. The world wants a ceasefire. 153 member states out of 193. It's 153 to 10, actually, if we were to put it down to 4 and against. And the conclusion you can draw from that, I'm afraid, is not an opinion, is it? It's just counting. So anyone can answer this question. Obviously, the more invested you are in the region and the people there, the more considered perhaps your answer will be. But how can anyone now avoid the conclusion that the motivation of the current Israeli government is, in the words of Joe Biden, they don't want any solution with the Palestinians, proved by the Israeli embassy ambassador to the UK, and I quote, they just want to punish all the Palestinians. So removing at a blow claims about eradicating Hamas, because, of course, when anybody says it's all about eradicating Hamas, they refuse to answer the question of how many innocent deaths are you prepared to countenance in pursuit of that very unguaranteed goal, because no one's prepared to say out loud all of them, all 2 million. Don't care. Joe Biden's come pretty close to saying that. They are a different kind of bunch. They don't want any solution with the Palestinians. They just want to punish all the Palestinians. So today, oddly, given that the American administration's support for Israel remains undimmed, I'm going to ask you whether Joe Biden's right or not. Looking at what has happened and what is happening, can you challenge the conclusion that the motivation of the current Israeli government is simply to punish all the Palestinians, while somehow simultaneously claiming in the case of the finance minister that there's no such thing as a Palestinian anyway? Oh, and of course accommodating the claims of the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom, that the calls for a two-state solution should now be ignored forevermore.